Okay, so the literacy test. Um, Now, this is something I wish we were in school for me to teach, because you would actually take one of these, um, and you would see how difficult this test was. So another method of eliminating African American votes was the use of literacy tests. Surviving copies of these tests indicate that they were designed to cause the test taker to fail. One commonly used test asked the voter to explain complex passages from the US Constitution, which you guys have read the Declaration in the US Constitution. They're not easy to read. Another test asks confusing, ambiguous questions like the one you're going to see below that can be interpreted in a number of ways, so that every answer could be judged as wrong. Some tests were so long no one can finish them in the allotted time. Thus, black voters were not permitted to receive help, while illiterate white voters were protected at least for a short while. So this was an actual literacy test given in the state of Louisiana that everyone who wanted to vote had to take, whether you're white or black, didn't matter. And it says, do what you are told in each statement, nothing more, nothing less. Be careful, as one wrong answer denotes failure of the test. You have 10 minutes to complete the test. Now, the actual Louisiana test would be 15 questions. This one here, I just gave 6. But even when I give this to my Regents class, usually 90% of the students get at least one question wrong, therefore they fail. Take a look at the first one. Draw a line around the number or letter of the sentence. Right away, I lose about 40% of the class, because the way it's written can be interpreted in a number of different ways, and obviously there's only one answer. The toughest one's number 6. In this space below, draw 3 circles, one inside engulfed by the other. Now, you guys are at the top of PS 89. You guys are well-educated students. It is amazing how many of you would get at least one question wrong and fail this. All right, this is one of those things that I actually wish we were in school, because if we did it together, you would actually, you would probably take it, and then a lot of you would fail. Not everyone. Some would get all the questions right, but it just goes to show you how tough it was to take, and obviously many people back in American history weren't maybe as educated as you were as 8th graders right now. All right, so we're going to do the same thing again in the chat. Please write your own definition of what you would say the literacy test was. A test to take in order to vote. Yep, pretty simple. Let's add to that. In order to vote, you had to take a test to pass by getting none of the questions wrong. Okay. Let's try and combine those two then. Let's see a third one come in. All right, so we'll write down for the literacy test. A reading test that if you failed, put in parentheses, got one question wrong, you are not allowed to vote. All right. So another thing, just to make sure you understand this, it doesn't matter if you graduated college, if you graduated with a doctorate degree, or if you didn't even graduate elementary school. When you turn 18 in this country, you're allowed to vote. Right? You don't have to take a test. You don't have to be highly educated. You should be able to vote. Okay, now, I actually have a little bit of a weird opinion, and maybe a kind of unpopular one. Great question, Nicia. Yes. Okay, so first you had to pay the poll tax. Then if you were able to pay the poll tax, you then had to take the test, and if you failed the test, you lost your money. So yes, that would deter a lot of people from voting. All right? So my kind of unpopular opinion is that people who vote don't have to have a high education, but should know what they're voting for. You know, I do think there's so many people that show up to vote that don't know anything about either candidate, and I do think that can cause somewhat of a problem, but no one can stop you from voting. Right? Like anything else, if you're going to have an opinion on something, then obviously you should know kind of what you're talking about and be educated on an issue. So many people vote in elections, and I'm guilty of this too. There's not just voting for presidents, but voting for like congressmen and assemblymen. I don't know really much about them, right? And I don't think that's the best thing to do. You should know what you're kind of putting your name and signing your name for. But that does not mean I don't think people should vote. You know, people should have the right to vote. But in this case, back in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, we had these kind of measures put in place. This poll tax and this literacy test, sidelined so many voters. All right. Now, here's where the laws become kind of straight out racist. And that's what the last one called the grandfather clause. Because whether you're a white male or a black male, you had to pay the poll tax or the literacy test. Whether you're a white male or a black male, doesn't matter. You had to pay the poll tax and pass the literacy test. Now, you could read between the lines where the South was really just trying to limit African American voters. But what's happening was they were losing a lot of white voters too, because a lot of white voters were poor. A lot of white voters weren't educated enough to pass the test. And it's a confusing test. You make one mistake, it happens. Okay? So the grandfather clause is where it really targets just African Americans. And we're going to look at the reading here. Oh, I'm sure it happens, Milagros. All right? Sure it happens. Okay. Oh, well, not, yeah, I see what I mean. I got you. There'll be a lot of people that got it wrong, at least one wrong. All right, take a look at the grandfather clause. So the grandfather clause was a device once used by some states to discriminate against blacks in voting. At first, these states imposed property owning, tax paying, and educational restrictions on the right to vote. Such requirements kept most blacks from voting, but also excluded many whites. Beginning with South Carolina in 1895, 7 states adopted constitutional provisions that allowed those who were able to vote before 1867 and those whose grandfather or father could vote before 1867 to skip these tests and taxes. Okay, so everyone look at that here. What year did the Civil War end? You need to look it up, You need to know what year the Civil War ended. 1865. The 15th Amendment, correct. The 15th Amendment doesn't come out until 1870. So obviously, no black fathers and no black grandfathers or no black people were voting prior to 1867. Would not happen. All right. Since no black people were voting before 1867, after 1895 here, this excluded whites from taking the literacy test and taking the taxes because they can claim that their grandfather had the ability to vote prior to the 1867 election. Therefore, they can be opting out of the tests and the taxes. No black people can opt out of the tests and taxes, obviously, because no black people could vote before 1865. Therefore, they all had to take the tests. All right. So this one was strictly a way to target African American because in the South, place like South Carolina, they lost a lot of their white voters, and it was like no one was voting in the 1880s and 1890s. They need to change that. And the way they changed that was making the grandfather clause. And what is amazing, it's absolutely amazing. What's the point of having the 14th Amendment that's supposed to protect minority groups when you allow laws like this to pass? All right, and this is one of those cases that goes down in a not so good moment in American history. So it was a grandfather clause was a policy that said people who could vote prior to 1867, I'll put white people, white males, are exempt from taking the literacy test and the poll tax. Right? And these were 3 laws, when you combine them all together, made it almost impossible for a black person to vote in the South specifically. Now, did New York have a poll tax and a literacy test and a grandfather clause? No. This wasn't a federal thing. This was a state-by-state thing. But in the South, this just completely, what the word is called, disenfranchised black people. Because it was impossible, almost impossible to vote. And when I say almost impossible, was hypothetically, if a black person could afford the poll tax and a black person could pass the literacy test, then yes, they could vote. It was just very rare. I mean, this knocked out at least 90% of black voters of the time. All right. And you think about people that maybe aren't so into politics, this doesn't become so important to them. But the worst thing of this all is, ladies and gentlemen, the worst thing of all of this is if a black person passed the poll tax and passed the literacy test, they still had one more final thing they had to do to be able to vote and to get by. And that's going to deal with this slide here. So if you have a notebook, okay, you could copy it in your notebook. If you don't want to write it in your notebook, then you could just kind of write a little space here, make a little space. I gave you a little room, and then write your notes here like I am here. Right? Up to you. For the first time in this class, I think we need to have a discussion on this group here. All right, so I'll give you a minute to copy it down, whether it's in your notebook or it's in your Google Doc. Either is fine. Just please copy this down. We will discuss it in 1 minute. In the chat, really quick, can someone give me a yes or a no? Yes, if you've heard of this group before, or no, if you haven't. It's okay if you haven't. I just am curious if you have. Yes. Okay, so most people have heard of this group before. They are known as the Ku Klux Klan. They are one of the biggest domestic terrorist organizations in American history. We're going to look at, kind of for the first time, we'll learn some things about them. This will not be the last time we look at them because they come up in different waves and different periods in American history. The first time they come up and are a thing is during Reconstruction. They aren't that big for that long, specifically at the beginning part of Reconstruction, because Ulysses Grant will actually use federal troops to fight against them. A lot of them were former Confederate soldiers, and a lot of them were just very disgruntled at the end of the Civil War, so they kind of were an extension of that, but they weren't that strong. They come up again, though, in the 1890s and 1900s, though they're still not as strong as we know them, probably today. All right, so, but they were still around. And this is how they used to look. I know probably if you've ever seen the Ku Klux Klan, this is kind of the outfit. You'd see them in the white robe with the white hood. That was not how they looked in 1870. They kind of looked more just like Halloween people, honestly, because they wore kind of random masks. They look a little weird. I think they actually wore the color black at the time. But they were not that strong of a group. However, the reason they were kind of put into play was to basically threaten and terrorize and antagonize Black people and any supporters of Black people. Anicia, not even close, honestly. The Proud Boys are the more current version of I don't even want to say current version of the KKK. They're a faction of the alt-right, which obviously has some white supremacist tendencies. But no, I wouldn't even say close to the KKK whatsoever in terms of what they do in history, But they're kind of new groups, so I guess it kind of remains to be seen, Anicia, what they actually do. But I don't think even close to the historical KKK. All right. So the Ku Klux Klan was created to threaten and scare any African Americans that passed the literacy test and poll taxes. So actually, they would go around and find out people that were wanting to vote, and basically threaten them, intimidate them, and then sometimes even kill them or their family if it got bad enough. The group was very specific at targeting Black people, obviously, that were trying to step out of segregation or trying to, vote. Okay, but also a huge part of the KKK was intimidating a lot of white people that supported Black groups, and they were also very big targeting the Republican Party. If you remember at the time, the Republican Party was the group that had Abraham Lincoln as their president, and then eventually led to the Radical Republicans, and the Radical Republicans were trying to help out African Americans get more freedom. So obviously, this group would go after them or would try and target them for voting for Radical Republicans. So the way they would threaten and intimidate was they'd, of course, threaten the families. They often burned down a lot of areas where Black people or white supporters would be. And sometimes they started to, and this is, I know we've mentioned this already kind of, they started to use the tactics of lynching, which is they would basically take a Black person or a white supporter and hang them in public as kind of a way to terrorize other Black people and white supporters, to basically say, listen, this, if you try and vote or if you try and step out of segregation, this is what can happen to you. Now, depending on the time period of history is kind of if they're a big group or not. So again, from 1871 to 1915, were they around? Yes, but they weren't that big of a group. They got very big from 1915 to 1930. So when we do our Roaring Twenties unit, obviously we'll come back to this group as they start to get a lot stronger. But what was a big problem back in history was a lot of the members of the KKK were in our government. Right? They were strong people in our government. You know, you're not going to have someone in 2020 that is most likely going to be a part of a, you know, terrorist organization. It's just probably not going to happen. Okay, if there is, it would be a huge surprise to a lot of people because I can't really recall anyone that is a part of that. Okay, now in 2020, does the KKK still exist? Yes, but they are such a small group. They're so inconsequential at this point that they pretty much don't, you know, if anyone walks around with a hooded, you know, sweatshirt or a hood like they do and wear their outfit, I mean, they would get into huge trouble. And not that it's a pitfall of our country, but obviously you have the right to assembly. So even at the time as the KKK, they're assembling their meeting, they're obviously being very hurtful and threatening, but it is not illegal to meet. So it's very tough to arrest a lot of the KKK at times because all they would do is meet and discuss things and not carry out the lynchings and not carry out the problems, though a lot of people realize what they were doing behind the scenes. All right, but a KKK meeting in 1925 would be like a regular town, like a town hall meeting. Okay, it wouldn't look like anything bad, but obviously the things they were discussing were not good. All right, so this was a big group, you know, throughout our history, but it was just kind of getting started. But in 2020, again, it's not a group that you have to worry about. There's some more radical organizations on both sides in 2020. I think Anisi has already mentioned the Proud Boys. They are kind of a alt-right type of group. They have some other ones. On the left, you have a controversial group called Antifa. So like the Proud Boys would be more like Republican, very, very strong Republicans. And then like on the left, the Democrats, you have maybe more of the Antifa group. And both aren't the best for society as far as I'm concerned because they, you know, cause violence and, you know, cause some problems and threatening. And it's just not a great thing. Daryl Davis, came closer if you can. Is that a, so Daryl Davis. I'm going to look this up quick because I've heard this before. I just don't know if it's the same person. Yeah, he was the musician, right? Yeah, I mean, there would be, you know, situations like that. That is a good story, Bliar, but that is obviously a story that would not happen too much, unfortunately. Right? Yeah, it's very possible they made a movie. I'm not sure if that was Black Klansman. Maybe not. I haven't seen Black Klansman. I know it's on my list of movies to watch. I just haven't gotten to it just yet. Okay, so let's see. Let me just see. All right, let's do this quick question here, and then we'll get to the rest of the assignment for the period. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses were adopted in southern states primarily to excellent too. Again, this is an easy question. I think, you know, right after a lesson, you know, just remembering that the literacy tests and the poll taxes were specifically to stop African-American voting. That is the key thing. All right, and they were successful. And very few black people in the South were voting throughout this time, and that is because of these laws, without a doubt, and the KKK, of course, on the side. But we'll look at the KKK a little bit more as the year goes on. All right, this is just the first time you're kind of seeing them. All right, going back to this here. Now you're going to work on this reading here. So following mouse, you're going to click on this reading. You're going to work on this next. I just need to say a couple things. You are going to do this reading, okay? And then you'll notice that there are questions. You're not doing these questions. I should have probably just took them out. I just must have slipped my mind. You're doing separate questions, okay, that I have shared with you here. So if you're on the same document, which I'm sure many of you are, just scroll down to the reversing reading reconstruction questions. There's a total of 5. Okay? Questions 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all from the reading. Question 5 is going to deal with this very famous political cartoon right here. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 are from the reading. Question 5 is from this political cartoon. This was a cartoon from a famous political cartoonist called Thomas Nast. And it looks like a very kind of sad political cartoon and kind of scary. But basically, you're going to do some noticings and wonderings from this particular photo. Okay, you obviously have a KKK member. You have a couple of other things going on from this photo, and you're going to try and interpret basically what you think this photo means through filling out the box there. All right. No one at any point should be going anywhere. You're just going to finish these 5 questions. If you do finish early, you can get started on your period 2 assignment, but I want to just quickly, briefly touch on that at 11:05 before you leave. Okay, so no one should be going anywhere. I have to take attendance, and I have to say a couple things before we go on. And I do want to just mention the name of the art, the reading you're doing is Reversing Reconstruction, which is a very good title because the goals of Reconstruction were to bring our country together and to, help out African Americans to gain more rights and stuff. And obviously, you're looking at everything that reversed that, okay, that stopped that from happening. So I think the title is very crucial in this particular reading. I'm waiting. Liard, you're doing questions 1 through 5, which are on the Google Doc here. Questions 1, 2, 3, and 4 from the actual reading, okay, from Reversing Reconstruction. Question 5 is from the picture all the way at the bottom of the reading. Milagros, unmute yourself and explain what your question is. Mm-hmm. Oh, couldn't load the rest of the page. Okay. Well, try and refresh it, and then it should work. If not, I could just share the tab here, like this, so you could do the reading here. You can tell me to scroll down if I need. It's probably a Wi-Fi issue from your end. Blear, do you have a question? You raised your hand. Assuming not. No, thank you. If that works, that works. That's fine. If not, just use. Okay, that's fine. As long as you can see it, don't matter to me. If not, you guys could just use my screen here to do the reading. Yeah, so a lot of them were former Confederate soldiers or people from the South that didn't like the ideas of African Americans having equality. As time progressed, it doesn't necessarily have to be people from the South. I think as time progressed, it maybe expanded to the North and stuff, but usually they were located in the South. Um, the problem was a lot of the KKK. Some of them were former Confederate soldiers, obviously, but some of them went into politics, and there were a few Democratic candidates in Congress and in state as state governors that would be in the KKK as well, and that's a huge problem because then it's not just a group, it's people in government trying to actually limit the rights of African Americans. Um, but yeah, essentially, you're correct. No, 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 definitely not. Probably never got higher than someone who was in the House of Representatives, maybe a senator. Definitely never a president. There could be presidents that were maybe not so against the KKK and you didn't really speak out against them, but no, no one would outright support the group. That would be what I would say political suicide. It's not something that a politician would ever do. But I would I would say there was a couple of presidents that didn't, at the time didn't really condemn the KKK and wasn't fully against them. I think Woodrow Wilson, who you'll learn about, is a big president we learn about. He would be one of those people um, because the KKK gets very strong when he's a leader. He doesn't really do much. But no, no president was ever in the KKK unless they really secretly hid it, which it would be very hard to do. No, just for question five. Just for question five, you use the political cartoon. Um, Question four, you maybe can use your prior knowledge from class. You don't have to fully use the reading. But five is just the picture. Take about 2 more minutes, and I want to go over the second period assignment really quick without me here, obviously. But 2 more minutes with this, and if you don't finish, you just finish it up a little later. Yeah, on my screen. You want to do it? Sure. Yes, Betty. Or is that a mistake, Betty? Okay. All right, so why don't you guys just quickly pay attention? So for the second period assignment, you will be working on you're starting your DBQ essay that you're doing over break, which I've already mentioned to you at this point. There is a good chance that if you follow my timeline over the next 3 days, you should be able to actually finish before break even comes. I would say usually 30 to 40% of the students are able to finish without a problem if they work hard. This way you don't have to focus on the break. My doorbell's ringing, so hold on one second. I heard you. Yes, thank you. Thank you. My bad. All right. So let's see here. So if you follow the timeline, you should be good with things. So what you have to do for the second period is just the DBQ documents, okay, which I explain how to do in the video. You have a total of 6 documents that you're responsible for doing. If you come in tomorrow and they are not done, you're going to be behind because you can't even think about writing the essay until you've done the DBQ documents. So you don't do it, you're just setting yourself back and creating more work for yourself, possibly over break. And that's the last thing I want. If anything, I just want maybe you have to finish up a paragraph or 2 over break, as opposed to having to write the entire DBQ essay, which I know the further it gets it to break, the harder it's going to be for you to do. All right. So if you forgot how to do the DBQ documents in the RQ strategy, there is a 4-minute video where I re-go over how to do it. So please watch this video. And then you're going to complete this Christmas break DBQ. Now, in the last 2 double period Monday assignments, I've had over 16 people not complete these. This is not the one not to do, because eventually this will become an essay and eventually it's become a test grade, and we don't want to fall behind with this. So I implore you, take your lunch period, take some point 4 or 5 o'clock today, and make sure this gets done. All right. Also, the last thing, set a timer for 30 minutes. You should be completing it in under that time span. RQ strategy means it should be done quickly. So you shouldn't be spending too much time. This is an ELA class. You shouldn't be writing a whole elaboration and going into great detail. It's just RQ. Restate and quote. All right. So I moved this to the top. This could also be found under classwork, and you could scroll down to DBQ thematic essays, and you're going to click on documents. All right. So I will end it there. I will see you guys tomorrow, and we will go into the actual writing of the essay. All right, I'll see you then.